You're too much, Ruthie. Too loud, too sharp, too everything. No man wants a wife who talks back before he's finished the question. Her uncle said it plain across the supper table, not even looking up from his plate, like he was commenting on the weather instead of ending her future. Ruth Callahan set down her fork and did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying only proved them right. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and living on her uncle's charity in a house where she counted for less than the hogs, because at least the hogs earned their keep. Her mother had died birthing her youngest brother, and her father had gone to the war and never come back whole, drinking himself into an early grave 3 winters past. Ruth had raised 4 siblings on flour, gravy, and stubbornness. And somewhere in all that raising, she'd forgotten how to be soft. She said what she thought. She argued when she believed she was right, which was often. She had opinions about crop rotation and fair wages and why the preacher's sermons ran too long. And she said them out loud, and men in Larkspur. Texas did not care for a woman who said things out loud. 3 engagements had come to nothing. The first man told her a wife should agree with her husband, and Ruth had asked him what she was supposed to do if her husband was wrong. The second man's mother said Ruth had a tongue like a bullwhip and no son of hers would live under it. The third simply stopped calling, no explanation offered or asked for. So when the letter came from the agency in Fort Worth, the one that arranged marriages for women willing to go west, Ruth's uncle practically shoved the pen into her hand. Some rancher out past Amarillo wants a wife who can run a household and doesn't mind hard work, he said. Lord knows you're strong enough. Just try not to open your mouth so much on the train. She went. What else was there to do? She packed 1 trunk, her mother's Bible, and a resentment so old it had grown roots. And she rode 3 days west into country so flat and wide it made her feel like a single grain of wheat in a field with no fences. The man waiting at the Amarillo station was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said what she'd expected instead. Jacob Hale stood tall beside a wagon, hat low against the sun, and he didn't rush forward to help her down like some men did, eager to prove themselves gentlemen before you'd even learned their middle name. He just watched her climb down herself, watched her drag her own trunk 2 steps before he moved to take the other end. You're smaller than I pictured, he said, which was not romantic in the slightest. And Ruth bristled immediately. I'm exactly the size I've always been. Nobody consulted me on it. He looked at her sideways, something almost like amusement pulling at the corner of his mouth. No, I don't suppose they did. The ranch was 2 hours out. A low house of gray wood with a barn bigger than the house and a windmill turning, slow against a sky so big it hurt to look at straight on. Jacob's letters, she would learn, had been written by his sister, because Jacob himself was not a man who put much stock in words. He'd lost his first wife to fever 2 years back, and folks in town said he'd gone quiet after, quieter than before. And before hadn't been loud to start with. Supper the first night was a disaster. Ruth had cooked for a family of 6 for a decade, and she knew her way around a stove. But Jacob's kitchen ran differently than she was used to. The flour kept in a tin that wasn't labeled. The stove tempered wrong, so her biscuits came out flat as hardtack. She was frustrated and hot and humiliated all at once. And when Jacob came in from the barn and looked at the sorry plate she set in front of him, she didn't wait for him to say a word. They're bad. I know they're bad. You don't have to tell me. I know how to bake a biscuit. This stove runs hotter on the left than the right, and nobody warned me. And if you're going to sit there and judge me for it, you can go ahead and say so instead of making that face. Jacob blinked at her. Then, slow, he picked up a biscuit, broke it in half, and ate it anyway, chewing like it wasn't half bad, though they both knew it was. Didn't say a word, he said finally. You didn't have to. I've had enough men look at me like that to know exactly what it means. What's it mean then? That I'm too much, too sharp, too loud. Take your pick. I've heard them all. Jacob set down the other half of the biscuit and looked at her properly for the first time since she'd arrived. Like he was reading a brand on a horse he was deciding whether to buy. I asked for a wife who wasn't afraid of hard work and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Agency said, you fit both. Seems to me they were right on both counts. Ruth didn't know what to do with that. So she said nothing, which was rare enough that Jacob noticed, and something in his face eased just slightly. Like a man setting down a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. The weeks that followed were not easy. Ranch work never is, and Ruth was learning 100 things at once. How to read the sky for weather. How to keep the chickens from wandering into the coyotes' reach. How to can vegetables against a winter that came early and mean in that part of Texas. She made mistakes. Plenty of them, and every time she braced herself for the words she'd heard her whole life. Too much, too loud. Instead, Jacob would just show her again, patient as stone, never raising his voice, never making her feel small for not already knowing. There was a day in October when she lost her temper entirely. Over a horse that wouldn't take the bridle. A stubborn old gelding named Samson who decided he hated her specifically. She'd been at it near an hour, sweating and swearing under her breath. And finally, she threw the bridle down in the dirt and said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, that the horse was an ungrateful, mule-headed, ornery son of a Ruth. She spun around. Ready for the lecture, ready for the disappointment. Ready for one more man telling her to quiet down and behave like a lady. Jacob was leaning against the fence post, arms crossed, and there wasn't a trace of judgment on his face. There was something closer to a smile fighting to get out. You're doing it wrong is all, he said. Come here, sit down and let me show you. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not sit down and be quiet. Not sit down and let me handle it. Sit down and let me show you, like her learning the thing mattered more than his pride in already knowing it. She sat on the fence rail while he took the bridle up and talked low and steady to the horse. Not about horses exactly, more about patience. About how Samson had been spooked bad by a previous owner and didn't trust hands that moved too fast or voices that rose too sharp. He's not being stubborn to spite you, Jacob said. He's protecting himself the only way he knows how. Same as anybody. Ruth watched the horse settle under Jacob's hands and felt something crack. Open in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Yet it was a Tuesday in November when the real trouble found them. A man named Wilbur Doss rode out to the ranch, uninvited, wearing the kind of smile Ruth had learned to distrust on sight. He owned the bank that held the note on half the ranches in the county, Jacob's included, and he'd come, he said, about business. Times are hard, Doss said, not bothering to get down from his horse. Looking down at Jacob and Ruth, both like they were something he'd found on his boot. Payments due end of the month. I understand it's been a difficult year. It'll be paid, Jacob said, flat. Will it? Word around town is your new wife don't know the first thing about running a household properly. Heard she burned a whole batch of preserves last week. Heard she talks back to the preacher's wife at church. Doss's eyes slid to Ruth with something ugly underneath the polite words. A man needs a wife who helps him get ahead, not one who makes him a laughingstock in town. Ruth felt the old shame rising up her throat, hot and familiar. The same shame that had followed her through 3 broken engagements and 100 whispered conversations behind hands. She opened her mouth to defend herself, though she wasn't sure defending would do any good against a man who'd already made up his mind. Jacob spoke first, and his voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it Ruth hadn't heard before. Something that made even Doss's horse shift uneasy. My wife burned preserves because I forgot to tell her the stove runs hot on the left. That's my failing, not hers. And she talks back to the preacher's wife because the preacher's wife said something unkind about a widow in town. And my wife stood up for a woman who wasn't there to stand up for herself. I'd call that character Mr. Doss, not a failing. Doss's smile thinned out. Careful, Hale. A man in your position can't afford to be careless about appearances. Payments due end of the month, like I said. I'd hate for anything to complicate that. He rode off, and Ruth stood there in the yard with her hands shaking, not from cold. You didn't have to do that, she said. Didn't have to. Wanted to? Jacob looked at her, and there was something raw in his face now, something he usually kept locked away tight. You're not too much, Ruth. You never were. Every man who told you that was just too little to match you, and it scared them. She turned away so he wouldn't see her eyes fill. Because 26 years of holding it together didn't unlearn itself in a single kind sentence. No matter how much she wanted it to, the note came due at the worst possible time. Right as an early freeze took half the winter wheat and a run of bad luck took 3 of their best steers to a sickness that moved through the herd like fire through dry grass. Jacob didn't have the full payment. He didn't tell Ruth that outright, but she found the ledger one evening while looking for a spare candle, and she did the arithmetic herself. And it came up short by a number that made her stomach drop clean through the floor. She confronted him that night. After supper, when the little house was quiet and the wind was pushing hard against the windows, "You're going to lose the ranch." Jacob didn't deny it. He sat at the table with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. And for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked like a man who didn't have an answer. Doss will call the note. He's been wanting this land since my father had it. Wanting me gone since he couldn't have my wife the first time around. God rest her, and now he wants what's left. Then we fight him. With what, Ruth? I've got sick cattle and frozen wheat and a bank account that wouldn't buy you a new bonnet. You've got a wife who used to keep books for the Mercantile in Larkspur, before my uncle decided that was unladylike too. Ruth pulled the ledger toward her and set it between them like a challenge. You've got neighbors who owe you favors from every barn raising and every calf you pulled for free. And you've got me, and I am not too much for this. Jacob Hale, whatever anybody's ever told either one of us. They worked through the night. Ruth found errors in the ledger, small ones, mistakes that had been costing them money for months without Jacob ever noticing, because numbers weren't his gift the way land and animals were. She wrote letters to 3 neighboring ranches, calling in debts of kindness with the plain, direct language that had gotten her called too much her whole life and turned out. In that kitchen, at that table, to be exactly the right kind of much. By the end of the month, they had enough. Not comfortable, not easy, but enough. Gathered from neighbors who remembered Jacob's father and Jacob's own quiet generosity over the years. Paid back now when he needed it most. Ruth rode into town with him when he made the payment. And she stood beside him in Doss's office, chin up, and watched the banker's face curdle when he realized the money was real and the ranch wasn't his to take. Lucky, Doss muttered, sliding the receipt across the desk like it tasted bad in his mouth. Wasn't luck, Ruth said, before she could stop herself, though this time she didn't feel the old shame rising after. It was a woman who wasn't afraid to speak plain when it mattered, and a man who wasn't afraid to let her. Doss didn't have an answer for that. Neither, for a moment, did Jacob. But when Ruth glanced at him, she saw he was looking at her the way nobody had ever looked at her before. Like she wasn't too much of anything, like she was exactly enough. They rode home in the wagon as the sun dropped low and orange over the flat land, throwing long shadows out ahead of the horses. And Jacob reached over without a word and took her hand, rough palm against rough palm. 2 people who'd both been told they weren't easy to love, finally sitting quiet together in the same understanding. My? Uncle used to say no man would want a wife who talked back. Before he'd finished the question, Ruth said, "Watching the fields roll by, your uncle," Jacob said, "was a fool who never learned to finish a sentence worth listening to." Ruth laughed, real and loud. The kind of laugh she'd swallowed down for years because loud women weren't supposed to laugh like that in mixed company. And Jacob smiled at the sound of it like it was the finest thing he'd heard all year. Spring came slow that year, the way it does after a hard winter, but it came. The wheat that survived the freeze grew up green and stubborn, same as everything else on that ranch. And by June, the herd was healthy again, and the note was half paid down, and the house smelled like bread that rose right because. Ruth finally knew that stove better than she knew her own hands. Word got around town, the way word does, about the mail-order bride who'd saved the Hale Ranch with nothing but sharp arithmetic and a sharper tongue. And the same women who'd once whispered about her behind gloved hands started asking her opinion on things instead. Actual opinion, like it had value. She was out at the corral one evening in early summer, working with Samson, who trusted her hands now the way he trusted Jacob's. When Jacob came up behind her and rested his arms on the fence rail beside her, "You did good with him," he said. "Wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Ruth ran her hand down the gelding's neck, feeling him lean into it, trusting. "I used to think that meant something was wrong with me, that I had to be easy for a man to want me. Simple, quiet, small enough to fit in whatever corner he'd built for a wife. And now?" She looked at him, at this quiet man who'd never once asked her to be smaller than she was, who'd handed her a bridle instead of a lecture, who'd stood in front of a banker and called her character instead of a failing. "Now I think the right man doesn't want easy. He wants real. And he doesn't ask you to sit down and be quiet. He sits down beside you and shows you how it's done. And then he lets you show him something back." Jacob didn't say anything to that. Not in words, but he pulled her in against his side. And the two of them stood there at the fence in the long gold light, while the horse behind them settled into an easy, trusting quiet of its own, the same quiet Ruth had spent her whole life believing she'd never earn. Standing now in the one place that had never once asked her to be anything less than everything she was,